Welcome to the course. This video is going to be about VirtualBox and how it works, not how to install it. That's in a different video. How to install it and how to install something within it. That's a different video. Right now, I just want to give you an intro of what are we doing with VirtualBox and why do we need it. So you're in a class that requires the ability to go through Linux and to go through Windows and to go through Mac OS. In that process, you have to have access to those kinds of computers. And if you don't, that's a difficulty. Now, on EAC's campus, we provide the ability right there. And this class can either be taken as a hybrid, meaning that we do meet once a week and you're expected to be there. And during that time, we would usually be doing labs, right? So that makes it easy. You don't have to go through this kind of setup. Or you can do it full online, and then if you do it full online, then you've got to set up VirtualBox. So prior to showing you how to set it up, let's take a look at what it is. So let me share my screen here. Here we are. I have become small onto the screen. Here we are, and I have got VirtualBox running, Oracle VM VirtualBox. It's an absolutely free program, and again, we'll get into how to install it in a moment. You actually, in the operating systems class and in the server class, we talk about virtualization. Virtualization has been around for a very long time, going all the way back to the 50s. It's always been one of those things that's been out there. The ability, for instance, to run Windows applications on Mac or Mac applications on Windows. Those were predominant themes through the 80s and 90s. VirtualBox is absolutely free, and we'll show you how to get to that. And you will notice here on the left-hand side, I have got some operating systems installed. And some of them I haven't quite, I aborted that one there. But anyway, you know, I've got a bunch. You don't need all this, right? You don't need to install all these different virtual machines, but you will need to, in the Windows course, install Fedora. You will need to do that. Once you get into security courses, if you're doing that, you will install Kali, and they actually have a VirtualBox file you can just download, instance, I should say. And you can even install Windows inside of Windows. So you could install Windows 10. I'm running Windows 11 here. I could run Windows 10 inside a VirtualBox and do all sorts of things within that virtual environment and not mess with my own environment. And that's really kind of key when you're having to have your own computer and use your own computer for this kind of thing. It's nice not to mess up your own computer in the process of learning. And having a virtual system helps you do that. So here's the concept, here's the idea. We are going to run a program like VirtualBox that basically is a type 2 hypervisor. You can look that up if you'd like. And what it does is it presents to the virtual machine that's going to be sitting on top a base system. So in other words, it's going to hide the actual system that it's running on. Unless you go through the process of opening some of that up. So it's by default, it's going to say, hey, here's your base system. And when you install anything on top of that VirtualBox, it doesn't know about the underlying system. It just knows that here's what I was told I have. That VirtualBox told me this is what I was told by VirtualBox. And so that's what I can use. You could create hard drives in there. You can do all sorts of things, and it all exists within a particular file, which I'll show you in a minute. Right now, what I'm going to do is we're going to take Fedora here that's powered off, and when you click on, after you've installed it, when you click on it, you will see on the side a bunch of settings. And this button for settings takes you to these settings. Or you could actually just jump into one of these areas, and it's going to take you to the settings, right? So I want you to understand that right here at the top of settings, that takes you to the same place as clicking one of these subcategories, same exact place. So let's take a look at what it's doing here. So under general, this information is set up as you install. So when you do the install, you select this, and I will tell you, VirtualBox is pretty dang good that when it sees it, oh, you're going to install Fedora, it it knows what to do with that. So you select, oh, okay, I'm going to do Linux, and it says what version, and you say Fedora during the install. I'm talking about things I'm going to show you later, so it doesn't matter. Advanced will show, hey, this is where this is going to. So this is being stored on the C drive in a VirtualBox folder in Fedora. Now, I told it to go there. I'm the one that said go there. The default is to store it in your, basically in your personal user folder, then VirtualBox. But this is an image that I'm using in class, and so I wanted students to be able to get to that. Anyway, here's shared clipboard, meaning shared between the host OS, that's what we call the OS that you're actually using that's installed on the computer. And drag and drop is disabled. So you could enable those things. Now, the reason they're disabled is because viruses. So if you're messing around in a virtual device, in a virtual environment, and you've got the clipboard shared and a virus exploits that, then it could transfer into your host OS. So that's why they've got that defaulted to be disabled. Here's a description that you can give it, and here's where you can turn on disk encryption. Now, we don't want to do that. That's going to slow things down. But this would basically mean I'm going to make sure that if somebody was deciphering this file, they got the file where this virtual machine exists, it would be really, really super difficult for them to take a look at that information. Normally, we don't mess with this. Again, this is kind of set up as you go through it. The system you might want to mess with later, though, because this is powered off, I can change these things. Imagine that. A lot of these settings will be grayed out if you're actually in the virtual machine, because it doesn't want you to all of a sudden change your hard disk space or change how much RAM you have. That's not something we usually do on the fly within our own personal computers. So I've given Fedora here 4 gigs, and you'll notice that up here it shows me how much I really have on the system, which I have 16 gigs. That's what the conversion is. I've got 16 gigs. So I could give it 8, right? Now, what this is also showing is, hey, when you start to get into this area where it's kind of pink or red, you're really starting to steal too much away from the host OS. So don't do that. So slide it back and forth as much as you want, but don't start stealing too much from your host OS. Otherwise, the whole thing will slow down. Your host OS needs RAM to run too, right? And usually if you're running Windows 10 or 11, it's going to take about 4 gigs. Now, since I'm talking about RAM, let's talk about something that's important to virtual machines. I have students ask me, hey, I'm looking to get a new computer. I want to make sure it works with all the courses I'm going to take within the computer field. What should I do? What are the specs? What should I do? Well, virtualization is actually one of the few things that will actually take advantage of how much RAM you have. If I'm only going to run Fedora by itself, I can up this to 8 gigs very easily and not bother my system at all, because let's pull up our task manager here. Opened on another screen, so let me pull that over. And let's take a look at performance here, and let's take a look at, we're using 8. I'm using almost 8 gigs on this machine, and honestly, I've got a lot of special stuff running to do that. So if I give it 8, I'm still got a gig left for everything to work fine. Now, the truth is Fedora doesn't need that. Most operating systems, unless you're really using them for tons of stuff, do not need it. So what this really helps out with, whoops, right there, is that I could run Fedora and I could run Linux Mint together, or I could run Fedora and Kali, and that would use a total of 8 gigs, and I would still leave 8 for my OS. Right? So having more RAM comes in very beneficial if you're going to run multiple VMs at the same time, or multiple operating systems at the same time. If that's not something that you're doing, then you really don't need it. The same thing will hold true for the processors. So I'm giving it 1 CPU, and I'm telling it you can use 100% of that CPU. I should have left open my task manager here. Go to performance again, sorry. And let's see what I've got for CPUs. I have got 8 cores. and I'm giving this 1. So that's another area where virtual machines will take your processing power. So if you have, for instance, a dual core i5, very common in a low end budget notebook, or a Ryzen i5 with 2 cores, when you launch this and say, go ahead and take one whole core, that's what this is dealing with, and go ahead and use all of it, those 2 cores are now used. You've got your OS using it, and now you've got the virtual OS using it, right? The one in the virtual machine. You've used both cores. So having more cores then helps you out. Since this one has 8 cores, I could easily say, you know what, I'm going to give you 2 cores, and you can use all of that if you would like to use it. That's it's interesting because we do some very difficult classes, like networking is a lot more difficult than the server class in the Windows class. But this class, Windows or server, whichever one you're in or both, those courses will actually use more of your computer than networking or even ethical hacker and that kind of stuff, right? We sometimes erroneously believe that a more difficult information like ethical hacking would therefore need a more powerful computer, and that's not true. It depends on what you're doing. So we're running virtual machines in here. I would recommend to students that if you're going to use this, you got to at least have 2 cores and you got to at least have 8 gigs. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use it, but you should expect it to react slowly, and you should expect not to really use your host OS while you're running your virtual machine. So I'm not saying it's impossible for you, right? If you've got a 4 gig system and you're running Windows 7 or Windows 10 on that system, and you've only got 2 cores on that system, don't say to yourself, well, McBride told me I got to go out and buy a new computer. That's not true. You'll be able to use that system. It's just that it will be slower because you're going to start using a huge amount of resources on that system, right? You're going to say you only get 1 CPU because the other one has to go to my system. And when it's time for, the RAM on your system, you're like, I only got 4 gigs, so I can't give you 4 gigs. I can only give you 2 gigs. I can only give you half of that. And of course, the operating system is going to run slower because both are wanting 4. But it's definitely possible to do. You can definitely do it. So I don't want anybody just running out going, oh, I better do this. Right? I'm just saying that, hey, if you're in the situation where you're buying a computer, that's stuff you need to know about. That is. And I tell students that I may have already told you that before you ever took this class. So anyway, I'm going to bump this back up to 4 because I'm not going to have a problem with that. Usually you are not messing with any of this, but there is a boot order. For instance, I don't have a floppy, so I don't really need that checked on. It doesn't matter. You can leave it checked on or off. It doesn't really matter. I don't have an optical drive. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say just boot from the hard disk. And you usually don't change any of the rest of this unless, like it says, special OSs only. You can do a little research on what does this mean. They tell you a little bit, but usually you don't change that stuff. Same here. You usually don't change that. Physical address extension feature of the host CPU will be exposed to the virtual machine. So this may or may not, you could enable it or not, is what I'm saying. And then acceleration, we don't really mess with that, right? So really all you're doing here, and as I said, this is all during the setup too. It asks you all this, what you want during the setup. So you don't have to come back in here unless you want to. Now on display, that is usually something that we always change because even during the setup, it will put it way down here. In other words, it'll say you only have about 24 megs of video memory, which these days, usually you have much more than that. So I usually max that out and I usually enable 3D acceleration because it's been a long time since we've had cards that don't do 3D acceleration, right? So I usually go ahead and turn those on. But again, you can see how it runs initially and then come in and change this if you'd like. All right, so we'll get into storage later. And audio, we don't really change any of that. We don't change the networking or shared folders or any of the rest of this. I will show you storage in another video because that gets a little heftier. But the thing that you need to know is that as you set up, it creates some kind of storage space that pretends like the hard drive. So right here, we're seeing Fedora VDI. And what I'm going to do is actually power this up. Let's start it. So you can see what is happening on the inside, like what is Fedora looking at. It actually launched on the main screen, so let me pull it over for you. This one will show a little snapshot. And then pay attention to these little things at least once. I'm going to click through them because there's no reason to just show that right now. But pay attention to what they say. Don't just click through them so that you understand how things are working. And my mouse is a little messed up there. There it goes. So there I am. This is my install, so I just put my name on it. The ones at EAC will have EAC on it. Fedora is a version of Linux, and it's what the book uses. And so that's why we have that set up. And there it is. It's using the GNOME interface. That's what you're seeing, is GNOME with a little tiny start bar down here, basically, or dock, and then being able to get to all the applications. Now, what I was going to show you is, let's just jump over to files, and then let's see how it's actually showing the files. So we start in our home directory there, and we're going to jump into computer, right? So right here it's saying, hey, you got a hard disk, and it's named computer, and you got 16 gigs. Whoops, let me go back. You got 16.7 gigs of 20 available. So it's seeing this physical drive. It's seeing a physical drive there. Now, I'm going to come back over because I do have enough RAM to do this kind of stuff. I'm going to come over and let's just open up DOS62 here. I just have that on the front. I found it online someplace. And of course, it opened over there on the other screen. But notice in DOS62, it says it's got 9 megs of video memory because that's what I gave it. And let's actually look at the settings. So let's go to storage, and there it is. There's a Windows VDI. Once again, that's what it says. And it says that that's a hard disk. That's what that little icon means. So if I come over here and I look at my C drive, and I've got to use the key to get out of that. There we are. Because DOS doesn't know anything about virtual machines, so I can't get out of that space there. In any case, let's do a dir of our machine here, and it says there's 6 files, and I basically have a gig free. Back then, DOS62 gig, that would never take up that kind of space. What I'm trying to show you is that I have a volume here that it sees as the C drive. And of course, that really is that VDI file that exists on the computer. Now, this brings us to another point. I just exited out of here. So if I hit the X on this screen, it's going to say, hey, what do you want to do? Would you like me to power off the machine? Notice that send the shutdown signal is grayed out. That's because DOS 622 does not know how to do that. You just, on those machines, you flip the switch and the power goes off. So that's all you got. And I'm gonna go ahead and save the machine state. And we say okay to that, and away it goes, and it does its little save. And it says saved. Start it back up. Using this because it's so small that I'll start it back up, and it won't take too long to get it going. And look at that, I'm right back where I was. So you'd never have to shut down these VMs. You can just say, hey, save the machine state, and it'll come right back to where you were. Same thing here. I've got Fedora running still, of course, and I'm going to move my picture so I can move Fedora a little bit. Hit that, and notice it says, hey, send the shutdown signal. If I do that, it will actually send that signal to this virtual machine and go ahead and power it down. I don't need to do that. I'm going to say save the machine state, hit OK. This one will take a little longer, and your machine might take quite a bit longer. It depends on the age of the machine. And it's basically just taking that whole state and saving it. Then I can come back into that. So I'll get back up here to Fedora that says saved, and I can start it up, and it's going to be right back where it was. So you never really have to power them down. You only power them down. I will have students that'll say, hey, this isn't working right. And guess what I'll tell them? Restart it, right? That's what you would do with your computer. This is no different. You would restart that computer. So there it is. Oh, it's not quite behaving right, but that's okay. It'll get there. It usually takes a little while to get there. And go back to activities, back down to here, save the machine state, and it will save it right where I was. It's fantastic. So I tell students, just save the machine state, and then it'll, start it back up when you need it. It is using memory. It is using that storage space, and it's using that memory up until you hit save, and then it'll release that for your computer to use. And so that's kind of a little tour of VirtualBox. I will open up. Let's open up. Yeah, I like Mint. Linux Mint. I prefer to use Linux Mint most of the time when I'm dealing with Linux. It's got some good features. It's not too heavy weighted. OpenSUSE has got a bunch of stuff. It's kind of like a Windows replacement. It's already got tons of stuff installed. Anyway, you would take a look at the mouse pointer integrations turned on, so on. There I am. That's Linux Mint. It's changing that resolution there. That's why that screen got bigger. And then I'm going to show you up here, File, Machine, View, Input Devices, and Help. So there's Linux Mint. It's actually using Cinnamon, I think. Yeah, Cinnamon right here. So the graphic user interface is a little different, a little more like Windows. And you can put different graphic user interfaces on there. But up here, these menus are to the virtual machine. See, you're running Oracle VM VirtualBox. And so you've got File, Preferences, Network Manager, Reset, or Close the dang thing, right? That's doing the same thing as clicking the X. Machine, take a snapshot. I would tell you, take a snapshot every so often, because what a snapshot is like, I'll call this clean. In other words, I haven't done anything to this yet. So I would say when you first create a virtual machine, create a snapshot that you can go back to. That's what snapshots allow you to do. Virtualization is fantastic. They use this kind of stuff. Big dog servers use this kind of stuff all the time. We'll take snapshots every so many minutes automatically. Anyway, the idea is that I've got that snapshot there. I come through and I really screw something up, and I'm like, uh-oh, I'm going to have to reinstall Linux Mint. No, I don't need to. I can actually go back to the snapshot and reinstall the snapshot, put that snapshot back in place, and then it's back to this clean state, which is fantastic. So take a snapshot right after you first install something, and feel free to take a few as you go along. So as you're doing some things, you've changed it and you're like, I like the way this is now. Take a snapshot at that point. We can look at File Manager. The File Manager, will pull up your drives that you have or don't have, and the options. Usually you never have to mess with any of that, but it's there. Where most people will spend their time is on View. Realize if you go into full screen mode, you need to know the host key, which is the right control key, and F. Otherwise, you'll be like, how do I get out of this mode? How do I make this change? I actually like scale mode. And so it says right here, hey, note, by pressing Control C, host C, is they mean whatever that host key is, and that's control. So, whoops, it jumped over to the other screen. So there it is, scaled, meaning that I can now make this as big as I want, and it will do its best at scaling that correctly. Now, what was controlling the size of the screen before is actually in here. What is the resolution that the virtual machine inside is set to? And that controls how big that is. Normally, when you install Linux, it's going to say, 480 by 600 or whatever. It'll go 800 by usually 700 by 1000, something like that. It'll kind of set it. So I think, to me, I will often just automatically set it to scale, because then I don't have to worry about coming in here, not joking, and coming in and going, oh, how do I change the background so that, this is icons, desktop settings, okay, let's go here. Oh no, that's not it. Right? If you're not familiar with getting around in this, see, but here's the current layout was 1280 by 768, which I had to up. So I upped it till it got to that point. Scaling is nice. Notice up here, where's my menus? Oh no, that just pulls up stuff inside. Yeah, I hit the Windows key. That's where it popped that up. Where do I get those menus back? So if you don't know the keys that they're telling you here, see, it said scale mode host C, so that was Control C, and it tells you, hey, you're going to have to hit Control C to get back out of that. So you got to pay attention to that stuff. That's under view. Take screenshots right there, recording. But at the same time, because I'm running in a window here, I can actually just take a screenshot. Snipping tool. So I can actually, right here, which I have a video that shows this, I can take a screenshot within Windows, and I can use whatever I have in Windows to actually build my assignment, right? So this is a screenshot now. So you don't have to do the screenshots within Linux, even though you could. You definitely could. Their input and then your different devices. So for instance, if you attached a USB drive, and it's like, why isn't that? I can't find it in Linux. It's not in Linux. It's not there. I don't know where it is. This is where you'd find it. This is all the USB drives that are actually currently running and working. You don't want to just mess with this. For instance, I am using this for audio right now. And so if I just kick that off and say, hey, go over to Linux, what's happening here is going to die in Windows. And so you do need to be aware of that, but USB is very, very handy. So you may get to an assignment that's like, oh, copy this to a flash drive. You plug in your flash drive and you're like, I can't get the dang thing to be seen in Linux. It won't come up. This is where you do that. You would find it right here someplace and you would click it. Like this is actually a big hard drive. And so I can click that. And then that'll be available right here inside of that VM. So that's just a little tour of getting around in VirtualBox. My other video will now show this is how you install it. So I'm going to go ahead and close Linux here, and I will save the machine state, Linux Mint to be specific. So we'll let that save, and now it's back to here. And I'm going to go ahead and close Task Manager. I'll just go ahead and close that down, and I can come back and load that up whenever I want. If you got questions, let me know.